The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming out this morning. This is Lauren from HR Simple. Glad you're with us today. We'd like to welcome Julie Pace here to go over issues regarding the I-9 E-Verify and immigration compliance. Julie Pace authors both our Arizona HRM and our E-Verify book, which you may purchase on hrsimple.com if you happen to live in those areas, or well, anywhere, because federal law and all that. We post our webinars at youtube.com/hrsimple. So if you don't have a pen and paper at the ready, please check our YouTube account early next week for the full presentation. hrsimple.com is an HRCI approved provider and an SHRM recertification provider. We will show these codes at the end of the presentation. Today's presentation will last approximately 60 minutes with some extra time for Q&A at the end. Enter your questions in the question or comment boxes at any time during the webinar, and we will try to get to all of them. And now for some background info on our presenter, Julie Pace. Julie
All
Pace.
right.
Oh, sorry. Did you want to go ahead and present that, Julie?
Yeah, I'll do it. Yeah, I'll speed it up. So
Okay.
thank you all, and thanks for joining the HR Simple. There's my bio up there, so we don't have to spend a lot of time on that. And Lauren's so nice to put it in there, and you can read it when you see the PowerPoints. But we do, and as Lauren said, this book, the employment verification that HR Simple has, is for a nationwide basis. It doesn't matter what state you're in. This is the actual rules across the country, so it is a national book on I-9 E-Verify and immigration compliance. It's a great handy tool. We'll be going through a lot of highlights today of some points, but the book will help you walk you through a bunch of examples if you need more assistance on that. So my name is Julie Pace. I'm with the Cavanagh Law Firm. We do a lot of HR issues, and I've worked with HR Simple for many, many years. And we believe in being proactive. So we're glad you guys are here today, and we know that you believe in being proactive as well. And that's why you're here. So that is great. So let's get started. I think we'll just roll into things. So I-9 E-Verify, let's talk about it. What are all the things going on out there? Well, there's been a lot in the news. And let's talk about the national immigration enforcement trends first. So the first thing of concern is the deferred childhood arrivals, right? It's a DACA. And one of the problems one of the issues was always how do we haven't had a legal program since 1986 of an amnesty program back then that allowed people, if they were in compliance with the law, they could show they were here for a certain period of time. Congress allowed in 1986 people to obtain permanent resident status. And they had to do some proving up of information and evidence and, again, be a good citizen and those kind of things. Since that time, we actually haven't had much of any programs at all. The DACA program for Deferred Action Childhood Arrivals, that's what it stands for, was started by Obama as an executive order because people couldn't get a resolution on a guest worker program. There was a lot of comprehensive immigration reform talked about, but it didn't happen. So President Obama did an executive order so that all the people who were brought here as children, who grew up, who went to school here, who were in high school and college and could pass certain criteria, were allowed to get documents authorizing them to work, authorizing them to drive, and authorizing them to be in the country. So those were workers that went into the workforce, from engineers, service jobs, all kinds of things, management jobs. And they were people who actually had to go through high school, and many went on to college, or a good number. So those folks have been here working for a while. It's several years old. And what happened is when President Trump got in office, he announced on September 5th, 2017, he said he's going to terminate the DACA program, mainly for the purpose he expressed that he doesn't feel it should be done by executive order. So he challenged Congress to come together and do it properly, and that he claims publicly he would support that. So right now it's up to Congress, the Senate, and the House to come up with a bill that's a true congressional bill, so it's not done by executive order. but they won't accept any renewals at the USCIS, and it's been a real problem. They're not going to revoke any of the currently issued employment authorization documents to DACA individuals, but they won't let them renew when they expire. So it's put a lot of people into a panic, and everyone's waiting. And sometimes these people are called the dreamers, but everyone's waiting to see what Congress will do. So keep in mind, if people come in, they can't renew. They should not really apply for one because it could put them on a list to get deported. So it is something that we're waiting for Congress to do something on. You heard it talked about on the tax reform bill just lately, but we'll have to see what happens with that. Now, what else has the Trump administration done? Well, they've announced that they are going to do quadruple the amount of I-9 audits that occurred under the Obama administration, where the Obama administration did more I-9 audits than any president in history, president's administration. And in fact, under the Bush administration, the Obama administration did 4 times as many in the first quarters of the year. So this is a big number. We were all very busy under the Obama administration with I-9 audits and worksite enforcement. It's going to be much, much busier, and it's much more with a heavy hand. They are now telling us, after all these years, they're going to return to worksite raids, where they round people up and they want to take them off site when they come on site. So a couple of things for today is we were able to stall those at times because it's not really appropriate to be scaring people on sites and having workers' comp injuries or having people run. So we try to work with the officers, and ICE in the past 8 years has been a very reasonable cooperative partner, but I think the tide has changed a little bit and they're getting different direction to be more law enforcement, more heavy-handed. So we're just going to have to see how they implement that change in their process. And that's what's coming. But the most important thing, and what we're talking about today and what the book does for you, is you have to have your I-9. Oh, sorry, I think there's some noise online. Sorry about that. But there's some, we have to have the I-9 audit and your I-9 forms in perfect shape. And that's really important to be fully complete. So we have to talk about how do you do that and what does that mean? And we will go over some of those tips today. Also, you need to be aware that there may be a closer scrutiny of any visa applications, particularly H-1B, where employers rely heavily on foreign workers. So you can expect audits if you do H-1B or H-2B programs. So you need to make sure those are fully complete too. Department of Labor also audits those in particular. So some of the things to think about. Next, let's talk about, and sorry, there's some feedback on the line. Maybe Lauren can work on that a little bit. There's some echoing and some issues there. But let's keep going while she fixes that. So the next thing is on PowerPoint 6. Oops, sorry, just skipped on us. On PowerPoint 6, so Lauren, I'm not sure, but it's, have you turned over sorry, we'll take one little technical difficulties here. There we go. We're going to talk about avoiding knowingly. And so Lauren will go ahead and mute herself so it's not picking up those feedback. And then we'll hopefully be able to get that line cleared while she's working on that. So sorry for the inconvenience. So avoid knowingly. That's the first step that we want to talk about, is a fully complete I-9 form. And what it means is you really have to grade your I-9 forms. You have to make sure they're 100% fully complete no matter what. And that is important for today's discussion. We have to make sure you have an internal system, that you're auditing it, that you're making sure that there are no errors in it, that you have done it within 3 business days, things of that nature. So that becomes very important. So internal audit, centralizing your I-9s and making sure that people complete I-9s on the first day of work. Second, see on the right side of the triangle. So we call this avoiding knowingly discussion because you're trying to avoid knowingly hiring an undocumented worker or knowingly continue to hire an undocumented worker. So that's why we call this page kind of your protection page. So to the right of the triangle is people and comments. No discussion about legal status, 24 hours a day or 7 days a week. So we don't want people to joke about it, or make comments like, hey, I wonder if these people have status. So that's where some of that comes in, where we try to teach it. It's like being in the airport and talking about a bomb. You don't do that. Same with immigration status. You don't want to joke about it. You don't want to talk about it. You want to preserve, your rights to everyone who gets hired by you is authorized to work. They've completed their forms, and everyone in the workforce should presume they're legal to work unless they come back and tell you they're unauthorized, that they don't really have legal status. And then that would be an HR investigation as soon as possible. So those are the things that come into play there. Now, the bottom and the bottom of the triangle, notice how many things we have there is how do you respond to government investigations? How do you deal with an ICE investigation? How do you deal with the crisis communication plan? Because after you have an ICE audit, you may lose a lot of people under the notice of suspect documents. And how do you respond to requests for personnel documents or inquiries by other agencies? Also, how do you respond to Social Security no-match letters? And what are you doing with your new hire packet? Are you using a W-9 form? And if you are you putting that in for individuals? Remember, W-9 forms get used for independent contractors, but we're just talking about using it for individuals, and that's very important. So have them check it. That verifies that that's a Social Security number you use, and that goes, W-9 kind of goes along with your W-4 form for withholding. So those are two good documents to have in your I-9 packet. Also, do you have policies on anti-harassment, anti-discrimination, agreements with leased employment agencies? How are you doing your contract provisions with them on who's responsible for doing I-9 compliance? And if you use E-Verify, you'll have another set of rules with the required poster and agreement to fill out. We do believe that under this administration, there will be mandatory E-Verify nationwide. So that is coming if it's not in your states already or where you're located. So it's good to be familiar with that, and the book does help you with that. So good. And as Lauren mentioned in the beginning, there is a way you can ask questions on the chat line. So feel free to do that as well. And so, Lauren, are you still online?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, good. Is there any way you can mute your phone specifically so we don't get the feedback on the call?
Yes.
Because I think that will help everyone be able to hear.
Okay.
Yeah, that'll help them all hear much better. Oh, much better. Once you do that, it'll help. Okay, so let's start talking about procedures and processes for government agency visits. Okay, that's the next thing. So once you do responding to government agency visits, we look at the first step of a memo. So if you're approached by a government officer and you want to make sure who's talking to you, ICE, OSHA, the police, Border Patrol, Department of Economic Security, any of those individuals, here's a script you can use. I'm sure the company will cooperate. However, I'm not the person to provide you that information. Let me get my supervisor or a lawyer who can work with you. So that's the script you can always use when people come in. They don't always come in with subpoenas or search warrants. They're coming in to ask questions. They're coming in to get information and figure out their role. So those are part of the script you can use. You don't want to do like TV and say, hey, do you have a search warrant? That would not be the answer or the question you want to do. You just want to talk about it from, I'm sure the company will cooperate. I'm not the person to provide you that information. Let me get my supervisor or lawyer who can work with you. That's usually the best approach. Now, if there's no supervisor available or the officer won't wait, then you just need to restate, I'm sure the company will cooperate, but I'm not the person to handle it. Can I please get some information and get back with you? So those are the kind of teaching you to have this script. You can have it available. Those kind of things, that would be great. So keep that in mind. You want to have that script. Think about how to get it to people. Your front receptionist sometimes is the best person to be looking at that. Okay? Now, you also want to ask them, when they're asking for personnel files, or they're asking for key information, get their business card or get their name and badge number and address and email so that we can respond right away. So you want to look at it like that and try to figure out who you're dealing with. And sorry for all the feedback, guys. It's really tough, and I know, to hear. So we'll try to keep going forward, and hopefully Lauren's getting that fixed as we're all talking. PowerPoint 10 deals with asking the officer what they really need so that you can actually focus on that issue. And it could be that they're there to arrest an individual or talk to one person that you can coordinate. Or maybe there's an identity theft investigation going on and they need to do something further. So those are the kind of issues that you have to find out so you can figure out what to do. If the officer states he has a subpoena or warrant, you want to ask for a copy of it and then send it to your company lawyer to review so that you can coordinate and cooperate and not obstruct justice when it's specific to a subpoena or warrant. So that becomes important then. So keep that in mind. Contact the company's designated contact person immediately so they can communicate with the officer directly by cell phone or in person. Now, the other thing is, so that's like a standard visit where somebody comes in and they've got a warrant or information they want to bring up. Let's talk about the ICE notice, though. That's something everybody wanted to hear about today. ICE is different. That's a 3-day notice for documents. They're going to show up to ask for them, and you only have 3 days to actually respond to that. You never want to waive your 3 days. And you don't want to voluntarily give them anything earlier than the 3 days. You want to get your information together, make sure to work with people, and get that addressed. So that's important to do. Now, the other thing is different, and by the way, you're going to want to keep copies of your I-9 form because they're going to take your originals in 3 days, and you always want to get a receipt for your I-9 forms. That's really important. So the other thing is, if the agent has a warrant for the arrest of an individual, and this could be a police officer or it could be ICE, then you want to cooperate with that one person's request and not interfere with them. It's not like they're going to talk to everybody at the company. That's not the request. It's just for the arrest warrant for that one individual. And oftentimes, law enforcement will work with you to coordinate where that meeting happens or those kind of things. So keep that in mind, too. All right, so that's your procedures to put together. If they do come in with a search warrant, PowerPoint 12 tells you the steps to take. Keep a copy of the search warrant, get it to your lawyer, comply with it, try to maintain a log or a list of documents to try to help with that and figure out what they're taking. Don't consent to things beyond the warrant. It's really limited to what the warrant is. We used to have one law enforcement agency that would come in that was local, and they wanted to take all the I-9s, but I-9s belong to the federal government and ICE, not local law enforcement. So we had to explain they couldn't take them, and that's not appropriate. So keep in mind, you don't want to argue with them that day, though, but you want to make a list if they take things, but you don't want to consent to things like I-9 forms if they're not the agency to handle them. ICE is the only one, and the new group, the Office of Special Counsel Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice, which is now Individual Employee Rights, those are the only two that are supposed to take the I-9 forms or look at them. So keep that in mind. Again, don't argue, though. Don't resist. Don't get into confrontation. Just make a list, get people on board, and try to figure that out. PowerPoint 14 is a reminder of how to deal with no-match inquiries. People calling in saying, hey, someone's not matching their social security number. What do we need to do? And again, you want to listen to them, get information, and tell them, look, I'm not the person authorized, but I want to get your contact information and get right back to you, whether this is the police doing it or residents. And then we always try to respond for our clients on the same day if we can get that from you. And PowerPoint 15 kind of talks about how you could address that. So when people call in and say, my number doesn't match my social, you forward it to your HR person, your human resource person. She or she conduct investigation into identity allegations. And then you have a response to send back and try to do the same day. And if the individual calls or states they don't work at the company or someone's using the child's social security number, get their name, their social, their telephone, their mailing address, and email. The fastest way to be able to respond is if you have that, so that you don't have to get back on the phone and have a long conversation with them. And you have to assume you might be being tape recorded, so you really don't want to be doing those things, if that makes sense. So that's good. So Lauren, are you still here from HR Simple?
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And are you able to mute your own phone a little bit? Because we're getting all the feedback. It's going to be very difficult for people to hear until you can actually hit mute on your own personal phone.
Oh, I'm sorry. I
So it is
thought I
definitely.
had hit mute earlier. Hold on. I'm about to. Let me know if it works.
Try it. Yeah, we'll see if it works better. It'll be a little quieter for everybody, so we'll see. Yeah, now it's working. Sorry, everybody, for the first little bit. So now it's working. Okay, so Social Security discrepancies, you've got a good handle on that. And then on PowerPoint 16, yeah, much better now. Now we can all hear each other. Much better. Quiet. Okay, so don't provide personnel information. Again, people will call by phone. You have bounty hunters. You have people trying to fake it. You have all kinds of issues there. And you have to remember that your goal is to be cooperative, but you can't give information over the phone on personal information. It's confidential. Plus, you need time to figure it out and figure out what your response can be. So again, get the contact information of the person making the inquiry, their name, address, phone number, badge number. And then follow up. We have two different letters we like to use depending on if the person's a current employee or a former employee. And you want to use your Form W-9 as part of the new hire paperwork to verify the Social Security number. So keep in mind the Form W-9 is critical, and it is a good form to use because we use it with ICE all the time to show our company did not have knowledge. Remember that avoiding knowledge triangle we went through earlier? That helps them understand that we got this document signed by the employee. It says this is their Social Security number. We all don't know what's fake or not fake, right? So this is a really helpful tool to help protect you. That's another form signed in the file under penalty of perjury that helps you understand what to use as their Social Security number. So we use it, and usually when we get an ICE audit, we often use that to defend and show that the company had no knowledge, and they did above and beyond to get steps to protect themselves and make sure the employee was being accurate. So it's a great form to use. Okay, now on PowerPoint 17, couple quick things. I mentioned 1986 was the last time we had a program, which is called, some people call it amnesty, but it was under Ronald Reagan. And it was when Congress and everyone said, look, there's a lot of people here for a long time. They didn't have a visa program at that time, and they hadn't had one for many, many years. So they made a set of rules that if people could demonstrate they've been here a long time, they were legal citizens, they could apply. And that's what happened. But while Congress did that, they did it for a limited window. They also said, hey, for the first time, we're also going to make employers do I-9 forms. And that's when it came into being. So basically, they passed the IRCA Act, Immigration Reform and Control, and told people that you can't hire or continue to employ an individual when you know they're not authorized to work. You cannot hire a person without completing an I-9 process. And remember, you have to do that on the first day of work. And you have to fill it out before they start work. And you must complete as the employer the documentation for I-9 by the third day of work. So that means Section 2. And if you're using E-Verify, you would also complete that within 3 days. But you also cannot discriminate on the basis of national origin or citizenship or by targeting unauthorized individuals. So keep in mind, you are limited. It's kind of a catch-22 for employers, and that's why we try to teach fully complete the Form I-9. That is still the most important tool. And it's kind of grading papers. It's good to have a centralized system to do your I-9s. Better not to have them done out in the field by other people. Try to centralize it as best you can. And then the next thing that we can do is have someone look at it with a second set of eyes. So that's important as well. And then you want to follow the instructions carefully and fill them out completely and make sure there's no blank spaces. Those kind of things. And then I think no extraneous marks, no stamps, no information. So a lot of people thought that you want to mark on them and tell them when you re-audit them and show your mistakes or write notes like the employee's ID number. You're not supposed to do anything on there. We mean anything. They're just supposed to be the regular I-9. And we'll talk a little bit about what do you do when you find there's errors with them, because that is a different story. But let's just talk about when they're brand new hires first and they come in the door and we figure this out. So that's the story on that. Kind of think about new people. Now, what's in your files, we'll talk about editing those, and that's different. So New person comes in the door, they fill out the I-9 first day, you fill it out completely, you have a second set of eyes in the office, and that takes care of it. If you go back and audit your I-9s by looking at these PowerPoints today or from the book, then you have to go pull that I-9 if it's a current employee, and if there's some edits you can make that are technical, they call them, you may be able to make them and initial and date it on that section of the I-9. It may require you going back to the employee to get it, and that you'd have to initial and date. And it may require you doing a brand new I-9 in some cases, and in that case, you would just have to redo the new I-9 and date it to that current date, and then you staple it to the old I-9. So those are two ways to deal with different I-9s. There are some things you're allowed to correct as the employer and not have to call employees back in or do a brand new I-9, but there's some things that require a brand new I-9. So those are some of the things we, work through. Now, the employee completes section 1. Remember on your I-9 form, your brand new I-9 forms that came out this year, the employee does section 1 all the way through. You're not supposed to ask for documents to verify information in section 1, but you have to make sure it's completed the first day they work and that you look it over and that it's fully complete before you turn over and do section 2. And again, you have to complete your section as an employer within 3 days. And the person who signs section 2 needs to be the employer who saw the actual documents and touched and felt the cards of the employee and is signing off that it looked and appeared it was them. So the photo sort of matches the person, that kind of thing. So keep that in mind. If you use E-Verify, there's one distinction on your list A or B and C documents. And remember that you cannot fill out an A, B, and C. That's overzealous and that's a violation. You can only do one document from A or one from B and C. So keep that in mind. But when you use E-Verify, there's a difference on the list B document. E-Verify requires and does a change to your list B documents that it must contain a photograph. So keep that in mind if you're an E-Verify user. The most important thing that you as the employer representative are doing, it's not employee representative, the employer, who signs it, is section 2 the person must see, touch, and feel the original identification document used to complete section 2. The same employee representative who signs section 2 must be the one who reviews the original documents. So keep that in mind. If someone calls you and you're in the office and you have a manager out in the field and they say, hey, I'm looking at the document right now and I'm reading it, that's not sufficient. That doesn't work. And remember that photocopies are not acceptable. You have to do photocopies, originals, and not photocopies. The only thing that could be copied is a certified copy of a birth certificate. So keep that in mind when you're looking over your A, B, and C document. One more thing. What's the current version of the Form I-9? Well, if you look at the document in the upper right corner and lower left, you'll see the dates. And the revised document is 7/17/2017, so this is the one that came out this summer. So please make sure from today forward you're using this document. And the expiration date on it says August 31st, 2019, so keep that in mind. It is mandatory to use it, so please make sure. And don't use the Spanish version. We like to use the Spanish version from Puerto Rico as a way for people to read things. And to kind of know what they are. However, you may not use that for purposes of filling out an I-9 form. So please keep that in mind. That's important. You can use it as a sample. So there is a new list of instructions. It's much longer. It went, I think, to 15 pages. It used to be 9 pages. And actually, those instructions need to be posted on your poster board. So, because you're required to give it to them, and I wouldn't want to print it and kill a bunch of trees. So just print it, one set of the instructions, and staple it to your posters where all the employees see stuff or applicants. Also, some employers find it helpful to do a list A, B, and C, and to post that as well. So think about that and see if that may be up on your wall where people apply, because if for some reason people don't have these documents, that will help them know what's going to be expected. And you're not allowed to ask for specific documents from list A and B or C or different documents. So for example, if someone shows you a resident card and you go, oh, I think it'd be a wise idea to ask for their Social Security and their driver's license, that's against the law. And that can get you in a lot of trouble. And that's where on the bottom of PowerPoint 21, it talks about the Office of Special Counsel for Immigration-Related Unfair Employment Practices Act. and the group, and they've changed their name to Immigration Employer Rights Section. But you can get fined for that. You may have to pay back wages for that. You can be under monitoring. So you don't want to make that mistake either and be overzealous. Some of the list of acceptable documents were revised, so just make sure to look at your USCIS List A, B, and C document. And they also issued a new M274 Handbook for Employers, which is a good tool to use. The other issue is there's a smart PDF. I wanted to mention that. I'm not going to go through a lot on that, but there is a smart PDF version of the new one. And that allows you to use it. It's not a fully electronic, but it is a lot electronic. You still have to print it and have the employee sign it at the end, but it does help you with fields and try to make sure that no one misses anything. So some people do like to use that version, and that's fine. If you like that, use it. Just remember you still have to print it, and you still have to sign it. So just keep that in mind. Other changes, there's an electronic QR code. There's a box in the Prepare Translator. This is starting to be the most missed item when you do your audits. You have to check yes if the Prepare Translator was used or no if they were not used. So please look for that and make sure that was completed in Section 1 of the I-9. On the top of Section 2, another big change was the last name and first name that was always supposed to be on the Section 2 on page 2. That was the most missed item, surprisingly, under auditing the previous version of this I-9. So watch for that as well. And there's a new box that wants you to indicate the employee's citizenship or immigration status as derived from the front page. If you use the Smart PDF, then you'll have a drop-down list of documents and calendars for entry of dates, those kind of things. So it'll still print. If you use Smart PDF, it will print on 2 pages, but it looks like it'll be 3, so don't worry about that. But again, if you use Smart PDF, you got to have them sign it, so you're going to have to keep that. And there's special rules about a fully electronic program, but that's not what the Smart PDF is yet, okay? They will get there, but they're not there yet. I think we'll see a fully automated program at some point in the future. Okay, so next, what is I-9 form? Let's look at it. So a little bit of a section here on Section 1. This is the employee information, last name, first, address, all those details that are important. So the one thing that's optional here is their email address and telephone number. They do not need to fill that out. So remember, that's a choice. So keep that in mind. That is not required. That's a choice. And normally employees don't like to have to give that information to the government. They're happy to cooperate to you as a company, but that isn't required here. But everything else should be filled out on the page. Their address, they don't want post office boxes either. It has to be an address. If you use the Smart PDF, I just thought I'd show you what kind of drop-down box you get. So PowerPoint 27 kind of shows you what that looks like. So I'll skip through those on the Smart PDF. A lot of people are just slowly starting to use those, but many are still doing the manual, or some are going with a fully automated program. And those are available as well from private sector companies. Just make sure ICE has rules about guidelines for those programs. So I know we have audited a number of them. Some qualify and some don't. And ICE will hold you accountable if you hire a service that does those that does not work. So keep that in mind. We talked about the email address and phone number optional. Again, if they have other names that they use, that needs to be completed in Section 1 as well. And again, the physical address must be used because you can't use a post office box. PowerPoint 31 I included, which is a drop-down box from the Smart PDF. And I just thought it would be of interest to you to see how they would drop down how the alien registration number or USCIS number and how it goes in the field, and some steps there. So it's just kind of examples, because otherwise you wouldn't see how it works. So keep that in mind. Currently the A number and USCIS number are now the same number. So that's a change that happened. Each date box under the attestation has a drop-down calendar on the Smart PDF, but we'll go on from there. PowerPoint 34 on your hard copy of Section 1 is Preparer Translator box, as I mentioned earlier. So you can see how that looks. It's the most missed item right now by the employee, which again dings you as the employer. So did they use a translator or not? Did someone help them? Now, a lot of people, again, print down the Puerto Rico I-9 for people to read and use, and that means they didn't use a preparer translator. If they did it on their own and just used that as a guide to figure out how to fill it out, that's not a problem. So just make sure it's done, click it to finish it, and then look at that. Employer completes the next page, or if they do it in hard copy. Then we move to the other section. So now we look at, and again, preparer translator, one other thing I should mention there is if someone helps them fill it out because maybe they can't read or write, or they really didn't need a full translation of every single part, then that's fine to fill that out. But I would not have the HR team just get in a habit of filling it out to speed things up and then having them sign off on it. Because what happens is, if someone gets targeted for using a number that's fraudulent to work, and again, we have 11 million people here working who are borrowing names and numbers or making them up because there's been no legal program, right? So they've been in service jobs since the 80s and 90s. So there's a lot of people in 2000s and 2010s. So we have a lot. And so we don't want to be, as an HR team or a management team, filling them out as though the government's going to accuse us of making it up, because that's what the employee says you're doing, is that they didn't actually fill it out. So just be careful about these warnings, be aware of them on the preparer translator, and don't overly fill it out. So now we get to section 2, which is the employer part. So you want to make sure they've now broken out that box, last name, first name. You add the citizenship status at the top of section 2, and you just use the numbers 1 through 4 in the box to match whatever the employee put on section 1. But notice, the reason they did this was to highlight, if someone checks they're a U.S. citizen, but they gave you a permanent resident card in section A of your section 2 document, right? You know, and they fill it out, that means they weren't a U.S. citizen. There might be an error, and you might have to ask them to look at that and let you know if there's been a mistake, because it seems it may be contradictory, and if they need to do anything and correct it. Some just don't understand the words and they make innocent mistakes all the time, and they hit the U.S. citizenship box when they have a permanent resident card. So that's why they made that, for an awareness tool. And I just wanted to highlight section 2 here. Here's your list A or B and C document. In list A, you can see you fill out the document title, issuing authority, document number, and expiration date. And again, you must look and touch and feel a real card. And you want to make sure there's no typos in the card. That's where we see a lot of fraudulent cards, things like that. You want to make sure that it does belong to them by the photo, those kind of things. And notice this big black line between the list A or B and C. You only do one half of the line or the other. You are prohibited from doing A, B, and C, or A and C. A lot of times when we're doing employee audits of I-9s, they have, you know, one document in A and one in C, and they'll throw the Social Security number in there, and they can't do that. That runs us into all kinds of problems. Remember, I said complete it within 3 business days. That's important, and you want to remember that rule. There's an additional information box now to allow companies to record the E-Verify number only into a section on the document. So that's a change, and you can do that, but don't place any other extraneous information in the additional information box. Nothing else, not the employee ID number, not they terminated, not I had to re-audit it because they had missing information, no other notes. If you need other notes, use a Post-it note. The certification section for I-9. This is for the employer rep who actually touched and felt the real cards, signs it. And he or she says they appear to be genuine and relate to the employee name. There is not a list for counterfeit documents or anything like that. So it's just using good judgment. If someone scotch tapes a photo over the card, then I would reject it. If California driver's license in California is spelled wrong, I would reject it. And I would just say, California is spelled wrong. You know, the government usually doesn't do that. Maybe they did in this case. I need to give it back to you. But I could accept a different document on the list if it applies. You want to sign it. You want to put the employee's first day of employment. That's important to put their date of hire. That's another most missed item. And it's all to the best of your knowledge you believe they're authorized to work. Because again, if they tell you they're not authorized to work, or they say things like, hey, this will pass E-Verify, these cards will, that would seem to give me concern. Are they authorized to work, or do they belong to them? And then you could ask. You're not allowed to ask people if they're a U.S. citizen. That's against the law as well. You can't say, I'm only going to hire U.S. citizens. That's against the law as well. So there's a lot of things you have to be careful not to go overzealous on and get in trouble. You do have to make sure, now remember I said we're grading papers, right? Make sure the signature, the date, the title of the employer, the list, the address, That all has to be filled out or it's a violation. And remember, the violations can be $2,000 to $3,000 a form today for just missing a signature or missing the name of the company. So it really does pay off to go back and do your I-9 audits. Make sure that as you're looking at this, list A is filled out right, or B and C, that you have them in there. And then you also have to keep track with the tickler system of certain cards that expire. So all the cards you would fill out and accept for A or B and C here on this document would have to be current when you look at them. They have to be current. But when they expire, there are certain ones you have to call them back in and update, and that would be the resident alien card, not the permanent resident alien card. It would be your temporary visas, your EADs that run out. It's not your U.S. passport. It's not permanent resident card or driver's license. They all have to be current when you accept them, but nothing beyond that. So keep that in mind. And your duty, really, you can sleep at night if you follow these procedures, you're doing things right, you've got your system in place. We always say update your handbook, as I mentioned on that first PowerPoint on avoiding knowingly. It's important to address that and make sure that you've got a system in place on these things, and you can sleep at night. You've got your systems down. So again, but you do have to touch and fill the real card. The most common mistake from a knowingly violation is that people try to fill it out while someone's on the phone, and that isn't appropriate. Some people, if they operate in multiple states, will hire someone in that state to address items. Again, there's a few things on the SMART PDF. I'm not really going to go through a lot of that in detail right now. So keep that in mind. There is detail on that if you want to use it. Now, on your Section 3, employers may update the employee's name in Section 3 if they're changing it because they're getting married or divorced. But I think it's always a good idea if people come in and say, I'm changing my last name, to get a new W-4 and a new W-9 signed with the name. And if you don't update the I-9, put a sticky note, but you at least want to be able to demonstrate that I-9 belongs to that person. So that's a good way to update and have a protocol on that. Rehiring, employers may complete Section 3 for a rehired employee if they're rehired within 3 years and they use the brand new I-9 form that came out this year. That's the other caveat on that. And remember, you always have the option to complete a new Form I-9 anytime you rehire employees. You don't want to keep I-9 forms any longer than you need to. They do have to be shredded when you get rid of them because they contain personal identifying information. So I-9s you want to keep the whole time someone's a current employee, but you may change your mind of how long you keep them once they separate employment. Usually people keep the personnel files for maybe up to 7 years, but on an I-9 form, you'd want to keep it a max of 3 years and shred them, and it really depends on the 3-2-1-year rule. And we set up a formula that you can use that the government gives you on how long to keep them for record retention. Again, current employees you keep the whole time, but the other ones, it depends on how long they work for you once they separate. Then when they're rehired, you just do a brand new I-9 form. What can get you in trouble, though, is if you do an I-9 form for a rehire and you have the old one in the file and they use a different name or different social or different information like that, then you are supposed to have knowledge that between the two, there was a discrepancy. So that's why we get a little bit jumpy about keeping old I-9s in case there's changes or errors in there, those kind of things. I think we covered most of these. Again, it's the employee's choice to provide their documents to complete Section 3. So when they have to be re-verified, I should go over this in a minute. So if someone's card expires, let's go over this on PowerPoint 51. So a resident alien card expires, or I'm sorry, employment authorization, visa, or document expires, not a permanent resident alien, because those are fine. They don't have to be re-verified. But the other ones, then they come in, somebody comes in, you update Section 3, you have to look and touch and see the real card again. They can provide any list A or C document to complete Section 3. We can't require them as an employer to provide a new version of the exact document they used before. So for example, let's say that they used a employment authorization document. Maybe they were DACA, maybe it was a visa, maybe it's a temporary status, whatever, H-1B, H-2B, whatever. Their card expires. You call them in, and I like to do a 30, 60, 90-day notice to that employee that on this date, until they get renewed and come in and do this, they're not going to be able to work past that date because you're not allowed to let them work one day past the date their card expires when it's these kind of cards. So it's good to be warning them ahead of time so there's no surprise about that. So you call them in. They want to show you, let's say they had a visa, H-1B visa before, and they show you a list A document for that purpose. Now, when they come back to renew, when their card was expiring, they show you a B and C document. Maybe they show you a driver's license, social security card. We can't ask for different documents. We can't ask to see the old card. You cannot do that. So just keep that in mind as well. And then you record and sign on it. The other point I made about expired documents is really critical on PowerPoint 52 is make sure you have a tickler system. Companies get in the most trouble where they've let a card expire and let people keep working when they have no authority. Or when they've let people go through an ICE audit under the Notice of Suspect Documents and they got a list from ICE and they let people go and then those people work their way back on the workforce with a different name or information or just stayed working, that can get you in big trouble. It can be forfeiture of assets, it can be big fines, and it can preclude you from doing work and also debarment from doing any government work. So this one area is critical that you don't let people get back on the payroll that are not authorized to work. Beginning January 2017, there was a new issue with employment authorization document cards that are automatically extended if an employee meets 3 criteria. So we decided to go ahead and put that in there to remind you because we're getting a lot of calls on that and helping people out with that issue. If they filed a renewed application before the current EAD expired, if the EAD renewal is under eligible category, certain items, and sometimes it'll be online. And so we just always get a copy of that, put it in there, and make sure that you know that's why it's extended and there's a follow-up when it's corrected on some of them. Now, what about receipts? What about a tickler system where someone comes in and has their social security card and said, hey, I had one, it got stolen or I lost it. I applied for one, so I got a receipt for the social security replacement card and that's valid for 90 days. You have to keep track of that and call them back in and get the original into the documents, right? So unfortunately, you have to keep track of that. And when there's a receipt for a permanent resident card, you want to be able to get, when the arrival portion comes in, you'll be able to see that when they bring it to you. So you also have to keep track of that in your system. So there's 2 types of tickler systems. Keep that in mind. Printing and signing, we talked about the smart PDFs. But on the original I-9 form, here's some more tips on PowerPoint 56. Use black or blue ink. Usually people don't have different ink in the same section because they're filling it out all at once. So that's usually a tip off something's wrong. Write all your dates, it's month, day, year. If a new form is redone, keep it with the previously completed I-9. No whiteout, scratch out, or mark through. Just start over with the new employee. And if a mistake occurs, complete a new I-9 form. If it's a brand new employee and they're sitting right in front of you, just do a brand new I-9 form and shred the old one until you get it right. Now, where you are looking at I-9s in your files and you take some of these tips to go fix things, then what you need to do there is do a new I-9 form and then you have to, or not a new I-9 form, you just do the sections. Like let's say you forgot, let me give you a couple tips. A technical violation as they call it. There's technical versus substantive violations. Let's say you forgot to write in the company name or the company address, and you go through your I-9s and you've got a few of those that got missed. All you need to do is write it in then and initial and date that box. Each box you modify or alter on a form, and that's fine. And usually ICE has been very, very good. If you've done your internal audit, you've corrected those kind of things that you could, you don't get fines on those. Substantive defects are different. Let's say the cards are missing in section 2, A or B and C. You're going to have to do a brand new I-9 form today and just start over and do it. And attach it to the old one to show you made an effort, but that you did an internal audit and you missed it, but don't write that on there. So those are the kind of things you'd want to do. And some of these tips in here we've already talked about. PO box is not acceptable. Birth certificate should be listed as either birth certificate or certificate of live birth or certificate of vital records. Those kind of things. So keep that in mind as you look at it. You do not need to keep photocopies of documents unless required by E-Verify using the photo tool. If you keep photocopies of ID documents and you're supposed to keep them clipped to the I-9, make sure section 1 is fully complete before completing section 2. Remember that. Don't request documents to verify the info in section 1. Again, one of the most missed items, which is why we bring that up so much. And the documents must be unexpired at the time to complete the I-9. And this gives you some examples of documents, though, that expire that you can accept. High school ID card expires a year after it's issued, but you're allowed to use it till that time. If the document doesn't have an expiration date, they like you to draw a line through that part of that question for the deadline or put NA to make it clear there was none on the list. So those are just some tips in filling them out. Social Security cards, don't accept them as a List C document if they say valid for work only with DHS authorization, not valid for employment or similar restriction. And again, don't accept photocopies. It has to be original. And if you keep a receipt for a Social Security that exists, then you have to have a tickler system for that. And remember that an application for Social Security card is not a valid document, only a receipt for replacement card. Other tips, we talked about the document title, issuing authority. I talked about the receipt for documents. Keep that in mind. And what you would do is just double check when they have a lost or stolen card and it really is a replacement receipt. You have to follow up within 90 days to see it and put it in there. Don't accept a permanent resident card from someone who says they're a citizen on the first page. That's a problem too. There's a contradiction there and a problem. Don't accept a U.S. passport from someone who says they're a permanent resident on the front page. So people get confused by it all the time. If it doesn't seem right, ask them to just re-verify and check the situation. Using Smart PDF, it will tell you that there's something wrong. PowerPoint 66 is the record retention rules that I mentioned that could be helpful to you. So keep that in mind, look at it. That's the formula to use for people when they leave your employment. You always keep current employees I-9s, but that's the formula you follow for the 3-2-1-year rule. And I also did a handling rehires page if that's helpful to you. Just the only caveat about this now for your rule, you can always do a new I-9 form if it's just easier to keep track that way instead of following these rules on this page on PowerPoint 67. Or, so you can always do that on the rehire. And remember that you have to use the newest I-9 form. So if someone had an I-9 form from a long time ago, and then they left your employment, got rehired, but the I-9 form is very dated, it's from 4 years ago, you would actually have to do a new I-9 form anyway to use the most recent form. And if you are rehiring someone and you use E-Verify, you have to go in and create a new E-Verify case on the dashboard and go through those steps as well. And remember, those of you who are thinking about using E-Verify, it is an easy process. You have to take a training class, you sign up, and then it will take your I-9 information within 3 days and tell you whether the person's authorized to work. It gives people a chance to contest, and they go through that process. So it is a good process to start, and again, it is coming nationwide. So some of you may want to get ahead of the curve. We have a lot of employers who use it, have had a lot of success with it once they build it into their system. So PowerPoint 69, just a reminder on what do you do ongoing to keep your I-9 audit and forms in compliance before ICE comes knocking. Internal training, make sure the people completing the I-9s are trained, doing training like this today, going through books, going through tips, self-auditing your I-9 forms, making sure you have an anti-discrimination policy so you're not targeting anybody or asking questions and things that could get you in trouble by targeting people. Record keeping, making sure that's in order. Making sure you're consistent in the way you handle things is always a good idea, like protocols on if someone's not matching their Social Security number, you get a complaint from somebody, how do you deal with that? Other things, there is a tip on doing some more auditing and things. So I put those recommendations in there from the government that they printed. And so there's a couple tips they worry about is they don't want you to conduct an internal audit, the government doesn't, if you're just doing it to target non-citizens or to make waves, or maybe there's a union campaign going on, you're trying to get rid of everybody. Or maybe somebody raised a concern about wages and you decided to do something. That wouldn't obviously be a proper purpose of it. It should just be because this is a good step to do is auditing and you're following the rules. If you need to audit something on a document, let's talk about that for a second. Let's say you go look at your I-9 and you find in section 1 that an employee, instead of the date of birth, they accidentally wrote in the date they signed it. So you could go to that employee, have a single line drawn through the mistaken date, have that employee do that single line through it, and then have them right below the date of birth, and then they initial and date it today's date on when they modified it. So they just want to see an audit trail. That's what they're looking for. And an employer can correct their own errors or omissions in section 2 or 3 the same way. But again, if it's a substantive defect, like you forgot any of the documentation to look at for B and C, I would do a brand new I-9 form. Don't use white out or scribble out information. If you're going to do something, do a single line and don't backdate or make changes or conceal any changes. That's the problem. It can get you in more problem than the other. And then again, if there's errors, just do a new I-9 form if you've got a lot of them and flip it to the old one. And don't write notes on it. I had one client, we did I-9 audits, because we do a lot of those, and we were grading our papers and going through it and giving them a letter and showing them what to do. But they took a red stamp on every one that says audited, 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 because they were doing it for all the ones where there were mistakes. So it's a big highlight of all the mistakes they had. They bought it at some conference for HR professionals. They're like, no, you can't do that. You don't want to do that. It gets you in trouble. Now, let's say you go back to employees and you want to complete a new I-9 form because you realize it's not as good as it could have been, or there's something missing, and you talk to the employee, then you need to give them a reasonable time to bring those documents forward. So, there's no set rule on that. Use your judgment on it, but just keep that in mind. And if you're running E-Verify and you forget to run it on someone in 3 days and you did an audit, and if you were actively using E-Verify at the time, you are allowed to create an E-Verify case. So if you're not actively using it, you're not allowed to. You just start fresh going forward. Because remember, E-Verify doesn't let you E-Verify people in the past, and it doesn't let you do it before they're hired. So just keep that in mind. Unless you're a federal government contractor, we do a lot with those, and then there's certain requirements for those individuals. So just keep that in mind. If you can correct the original I-9, that's better, but it doesn't always work. All right, a couple other quick things about ICE before we wrap up today. ICE is the one that shows up. They drop the notice, as I said. They give you 72 hours, and you might get notices within 1 month to 6 months of notice of technical defects, meaning they'll give you 10 days to correct them. And remember, that's great because you save $2,000 to $3,000 in I-9 if you can do that. Notice of suspect documents means you have less than 10 days to notify the employee. They can challenge it if they want, but if they can't, they're let go and can't work for you again. And notice of discrepancies means that you have to follow up and let them explain something to ICE, and ICE wants you to verify a couple things. It just means there's a glitch in their computer system and they want to give the person the benefit of the doubt. Doesn't always mean they're going to be let go. It can be. You could get a warning notice or a notice of intent to fine when ICE comes. The bigger problem then is we usually contest them through the administrative process and get them resolved as we work with their lawyers and the process, and that happens a lot. The fines have gone up, $216 to $2,100 of fine I-9 for anything missing, anything. The name not listed on the second page, things like that. So be careful to make sure you're correcting everything. When I say grading papers, it's important. I did put in here, ICE has a bit of a fine schedule, but really it's expensive, it adds up. And then knowingly is if you let somebody, so there's the I-9 violation, right? If you miss information, then on top of it, you have a different one, which is if you let somebody work 1 day past the date they were scheduled to work, you have a real issue because now you can get these kind of fines. They can be up to $4,300 for a worker. They can be, $10,000. I mean, it can be pattern and practice, and you can have criminals. So that's why it's important to have protocols. And you can't knowingly hire 10 or more people in a 12-month period with knowledge of the legal entry into the country. That can be considered harboring. That's where you have asset forfeiture and prison time. Golden State Fence is a perfect example of some of that. And it took their company assets of 4.7. They were actually building the border fence, if you could believe it. And somebody snuck back on the payroll a few people with the name, and they had a notice of suspect document list from before, and a few people snuck back on, and so this is what happened. They had to pay $4.7 million, and the owner received 6 months house arrest. So those are some of the things that are a problem. If you've had an I-9 audit once and you passed it, the second one is going to be more difficult. And right now, they're not giving you a break to do technical corrections. They expect you to do it. It's something called the virtue memo, and they don't want to allow you to fix them. The first time you ever get audited, if you see technical defects, they'll let you fix them within 10 days. But after that, they're being difficult about that situation. So just keep that in mind. If you want to go to a fully electronic I-9 system, I put a couple of PowerPoints in here on that. I just thought it'd be helpful for you to go through it. An electronic signature program is talked about on paragraph 86. The main thing with these electronic programs is on PowerPoint 87 is the audit trail. They want all those components that's listed on 87. So we audit them. They don't all, just because they're big national companies and they're out there, it doesn't mean they comply. So keep that in mind. Anti-discrimination, you can't target people based on national origin, by the language they speak, by if they sound or look foreign to you. That's against the law. You have to look at the facts, not the faces, and it's a reminder of that. And you're required to accept documents that appear genuine, and you're prohibited from asking for more or different documents. People have a complaint process to go through because they feel an employer asked for their social security number or ask for something specific, they can file a complaint within 180 days, and they'll make determinations within 120 days, and then they can go forward in a process on that. I did just put in here, this is a kind of train the trainer approach as we're wrapping up, is just put some cases in here. I'm not going to go through these. You can look at them yourself, but it's hundreds of thousands of dollars. It's all kinds of requests for monitoring. They have to turn reports in. You can see the kind of things that are happening here. It's not good. So, and sometimes it's the I-9 and E-Verify that becomes a problem, because E-Verify has its own requirements separate from I-9. So you'll get audits, and as you see these, it'll be audits from I-9 and E-Verify process violations. I've got a little table in here that I think is actually helpful at times. It's a flow chart, but we can send it to you if it's not in here today. I think it's not there on there. But it's an I-9 E-Verify flow chart of what you do from start to finish. And that sometimes can be helpful to look at if you want that. But anyway, we know about the I-9 investigations now from ICE. You have to keep copies of all your ICE documents. There'll be notices provided throughout time. Don't just turn over your stock without a list of what I-9s they took from you. Remember that we've got more surveys and raids happening today. Employees get a chance to contest if they have been on the list to say they have a counterfeit document. It's not true. Mistakes do happen. Keep that in mind. Continue correcting your Form I-9s and following best practices. It's a good idea to audit your I-9s regularly. And again, second set of eyes, centralize them. And I put a few more cases here at the end on criminal enforcement. So not just civil, but criminal. And you'll see these are in the millions. They do all kinds of forfeitures of what's left, or they run the business out of town, meaning they go out of business. Sometimes they put people in jail. So those are just, if you're interested to look at them, feel free to look at them. PowerPoint 104 at the end here just talks about the rogue employee defense. We want to be able to say you taught your employees and managers what to do. And if an individual manager violated your rules, or was hiring people who are undocumented, or was creating false documents in the garage and selling them, it shouldn't be held against your company because you didn't know that and you took the steps to train your people. I have a form I like people to sign in the handbook. It's called Immigration Compliance Acknowledgement Form. So that's something to think about and use. So that just gives you an idea on why we talk about that. And then I put a couple of PowerPoints in just for you to fly through and look at on E-Verify. Just wanted you to know how that works. You're responsible to check the E-Verify dashboard regularly to make sure if someone does challenge and they were attentive non-confirmation, that they were able to go and correct it, or E-Verify says, nope, you got to let them go. So you also can't let people work longer than what they appear on the E-Verify dashboard. And what it starts is with the I-9 process. If someone gets through the I-9 process, if they don't make it through and they can't complete it, then you stop there and you don't do E-Verify. But if they do make it through, this just shows on PowerPoint 109 some of the steps you use, and on 110 and how you match it and whether you get the further action notice. And then you have to have, on the further action notice, you have to print a copy and give it to them if they're gonna, and they get a chance to know about it, or else you can get a violation for not doing that. So you manually print it, you give it to them. If they show up as a fan, they call it, or tentative non-confirmation. And then if they want to contest it, same thing. You have to print it and keep a copy. And then the employee has 8 business days to go get it resolved. And then on the dashboard, it'll finally say either employment authorized or final non-confirmation. So 110 and 111 in the PowerPoints kind of explain that process to you. And you can't let somebody work past that time, because that's when you can get criminal and civil penalties. And you cannot take adverse action if someone does contest. So they get a right to do that. Do not require individuals to use self-check E-Verify. You do have to have your posters up. You want to apply the process uniformly to all newly hired, and you have to complete it fully within 3 days if you are using it. And you cannot do it for existing employees, and you cannot use it for applicants. Remember that to do an I-9 form and E-Verify, they have to be hired. So keep that in mind. And you can't terminate someone just because they won't challenge or do the E-Verify process. So you have to allow the employee to work while they challenge the tentative non-confirmation. So you may only work 10 days, and maybe it doesn't get straightened out, and you may have to let them go. So that's one of the downsides of it. And, it's just one of those things. And then if they have the E-Verify photo tool, will sometimes pop up a photo, and you want to keep photocopies of the document they give you and look at it on the computer and make sure they match in clothing and style for the photo. That happens a lot with permanent resident cards and in some states with the driver's licenses. You also want to close all cases correctly, and there's a whole thing on E-Verify, and I put in the website here if you want to learn more. It's a really simple process once you get started on it. Then the last thing is I want to leave you is with the requirements of I-9 and E-Verify programs. I went ahead and put the flowchart in here. I thought I had. I couldn't find it, but there it is. That helps you as a one-pager to print to kind of look at day 1 through day 3 through 10. How do you deal with it? What do you do? And how does that work? So this is a good summary from today of things to look at. I know we're out of time. We went just a little bit over. We want to thank you very much for your time and attention today. And to be proactive, I'm Julie Pace with the Cavanagh Law Firm. On behalf of HR Simple, we thank you for committing to be here and learning about I-9 and E-Verify to protect your company and make sure you're doing things properly and avoid issues if ICE comes knocking. And the book is available. It's a nationwide book and gives you a lot of details and forms and tips and things like that. But thank you, and I'll turn it back over to Lauren to wrap up and close it out. So again, thank you very much, and we look forward to you continuing with the HR Simple programs and tools that are offered to help you in your business. And I will go down to the end. I think there's one more thing. Yeah. Go ahead, Lauren.